She wasn't reckless with money. She wasn't irresponsible. She had done what she was taught to do: budget carefully, avoid excess, stretch what little she had. And still, the numbers no longer made sense. No matter how many times she recalculated, next month remained unanswered. She noticed how her thoughts always returned to the same question. How am I going to pay for next month? It followed her through ordinary moments, while washing dishes, checking her phone, lying awake at night. The question didn't shout. It whispered. Constantly. What made it heavier was the silence around it. She didn't talk about it openly. From the outside, she seemed composed. Capable. Managing. But inside, the pressure built quietly, day after day, without relief. She felt trapped between responsibility and reality. She wanted to be calm, to trust, to stay grounded, but fear crept in through the gaps. Not panic. Not despair. Just the steady weight of uncertainty pressing against her chest. She told herself this was temporary. That something would work out. That it always had before. But this time felt different. The margin was gone. The safety net was thin. And pretending not to notice only made the tension worse. She wasn't asking for abundance. She wasn't dreaming of luxury. She just needed stability. Breathing room. A way to meet the next month without dread. Still, she kept going. Showing up. Handling what she could. Carrying the uncertainty quietly, hoping that effort alone would somehow create an answer. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, when the numbers stopped making sense, was the beginning of something far bigger than a financial solution. The pressure didn't show up as panic attacks or dramatic breakdowns. It showed up in subtler ways. A tight feeling in her chest when she checked her account. A pause before opening emails. A heaviness that followed her even on days that were otherwise normal. She became careful with everything. Conversations. Small purchases. Future plans. Each decision carried an invisible calculation behind it. Not because she wanted control, but because uncertainty had made her hyper-aware of every choice. She noticed how her mind never truly rested. Even during moments of distraction, the thought lingered in the background, waiting to resurface. What if nothing changes? What if this gets worse? The questions didn't need answers to be exhausting. What made it harder was the contrast between her inner world and how she appeared externally. She smiled when needed. She responded politely. She fulfilled responsibilities. No one would guess how much mental energy it took just to stay composed. She didn't feel entitled to complain. Others had it worse. She told herself that repeatedly. Gratitude became a way to silence fear rather than process it. She tried to stay positive without allowing herself to be honest. At night, when the world finally quieted down, the pressure felt louder. Numbers replayed in her mind. Deadlines blurred together. Sleep came, but it wasn't restorative. It only paused the worry. She wondered how long she could keep carrying this without something giving way. Not externally, internally. The constant tension was reshaping her thoughts, her breath, her sense of safety. Still, she kept going. Because stopping wasn't an option. Because responsibility didn't wait for certainty. And because she believed that endurance was what people did when answers weren't available. She didn't know it yet, but this quiet pressure was not breaking her. It was preparing her for a different way of responding to reality, one she had never been taught. Fear didn't arrive all at once. It settled in gradually, becoming part of her routine. It showed up in the way she double-checked numbers, in how she avoided looking too far ahead, in the subtle tension she carried even during ordinary tasks. She noticed how her thoughts had started to revolve around lack. Not because she wanted them to, but because uncertainty demanded attention. Her mind kept trying to solve a problem that had no visible solution yet. And that constant mental loop drained her more than she realized. She tried to stay rational, to remind herself that worrying wouldn't change anything. But logic didn't quiet the body. Her breath stayed shallow. Her shoulders stayed tight. Fear lived there now, not loud, but persistent. What troubled her most was how this fear began shaping her identity. She wasn't just someone facing a financial challenge. She started seeing herself as someone at risk. Someone who could fall behind. Someone who had to be careful all the time. She became hyper-aware of time. Each passing day felt like it was moving her closer to a deadline she couldn't meet yet. The calendar didn't wait. And that awareness made the present feel fragile. She tried to distract herself. To stay busy. To avoid thinking too much. But fear has a way of resurfacing when ignored. It found her in quiet moments, reminding her of what she didn't know how to solve. Still, she didn't give up. She didn't spiral. She simply carried the fear alongside everything else. It became part of how she moved through the world, cautious, alert, constantly bracing. She didn't realize yet that fear was not the enemy. It was information. A signal pointing towards something deeper that needed to change, not in her circumstances, but in how she was relating to them. There was one night when pretending stopped working. She sat alone, surrounded by silence, and for the first time allowed herself to admit the truth: she didn't know what to do next. Not in a dramatic way. Just an honest recognition that effort had reached its limit. She wasn't asking for a miracle. She wasn't even asking for clarity. She simply acknowledged that all the strategies she knew were no longer enough. That realization felt both frightening and strangely relieving. For so long, she had believed that not knowing meant failure. That uncertainty was something to fix as quickly as possible. But that night, she stayed with it. She didn't rush to distract herself. She didn't try to force a solution. She noticed how heavy it felt to always be the one who figures it out. How much pressure she had placed on herself to never pause, never falter, never admit confusion. Admitting she didn't know felt like setting something down she had been carrying for years. Her thoughts slowed. The constant mental noise softened. In that quiet, something unexpected happened. Her fears stopped demanding answers. It simply existed, without control. She realized that this was the first time she had truly stopped resisting her situation. Not accepting defeat, but accepting reality as it was. And that distinction mattered more than she understood then. She didn't solve anything that night. The numbers were still there. The uncertainty remained. But something inside her had shifted. The pressure eased, just enough to breathe. She didn't know it yet, but this moment of surrender, not to circumstances, but to honesty, was creating space for something entirely different to enter. After that night, something subtle lingered. She hadn't solved the problem, but she had stopped pretending it didn't exist. The calm she had been performing for weeks dissolved, and in its place came something more real: awareness. Not panic. Not hope. Just presence. She noticed how much energy she had spent trying to appear stable, even to herself. Telling herself everything would be fine without actually feeling fine. That performance had been exhausting. Letting it go felt like exhaling after holding her breath for too long. Without the pressure to stay positive, her emotions settled into something clearer. Fear was still there, but it no longer dominated every thought. It became one feeling among many, not the lens through which she saw everything. She realized that pretending to be calm had kept her disconnected from her intuition. When you silence discomfort too quickly, you silence information. Now, by allowing herself to feel honestly, she could sense what was happening inside her more accurately. There was a quiet shift in how she related to the situation. Instead of asking how do I fix this immediately, she began asking what is this trying to show me? That question changed the tone of everything. She became less reactive, less desperate for reassurance. She wasn't resigned, she was grounded. And grounding brought clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. She noticed how this honesty softened her body. Her breath deepened. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. The constant tension that had lived in her chest loosened its grip. She didn't yet know what would happen next. But for the first time, she felt connected to herself again. And that connection, though quiet, was stronger than any strategy she had tried before. She didn't realize it then, but this moment, when she stopped pretending to be calm, was the beginning of real alignment. After that night, something subtle lingered. She hadn't solved the problem, but she had stopped pretending it didn't exist. The calm she had been performing for weeks dissolved, and in its place came something more real: awareness. Not panic. Not hope. Just presence. She noticed how much energy she had spent trying to appear stable, even to herself. Telling herself everything would be fine without actually feeling fine. That performance had been exhausting. Letting it go felt like exhaling after holding her breath for too long. Without the pressure to stay positive, her emotions settled into something clearer. Fear was still there, but it no longer dominated every thought. It became one feeling among many, not the lens through which she saw everything. She realized that pretending to be calm had kept her disconnected from her intuition. When you silence discomfort too quickly, you silence information. Now, by allowing herself to feel honestly, she could sense what was happening inside her more accurately. There was a quiet shift in how she related to the situation. Instead of asking how do I fix this immediately, she began asking what is this trying to show me? That question changed the tone of everything. She became less reactive, less desperate for reassurance. She wasn't resigned, she was grounded. And grounding brought clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. She noticed how this honesty softened her body. Her breath deepened. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. The constant tension that had lived in her chest loosened its grip. She didn't yet know what would happen next. But for the first time, she felt connected to herself again. And that connection, though quiet, was stronger than any strategy she had tried before. She didn't realize it then, but this moment, when she stopped pretending to be calm, was the beginning of real alignment. When she stopped panicking about the future, something subtle but profound opened inside her. It wasn't relief in the sense of having answers. It was space. Space where her thoughts no longer collided constantly. Space where her body could exist without bracing for impact. That space alone changed how everything felt. She realized how panic had been compressing her inner world. Every thought rushed another, every scenario demanded attention, every fear insisted on being solved immediately. The moment she stopped feeding that urgency, the mental noise began to loosen its grip. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was expansive. In that openness, she felt herself return. Not as someone in danger. Not as someone failing. But as someone present. Her identity detached slightly from the problem. She wasn't the woman who couldn't pay next month. She was a woman experiencing uncertainty, and that shift softened the weight she had been carrying. She saw clearly how panic had narrowed her perception. Fear only shows you the exits you already know. Calm, on the other hand, reveals paths you couldn't see before. Possibility requires space, and panic had left none. This didn't mean confidence suddenly appeared. It meant grounding did. Her thoughts slowed enough to connect instead of scatter. Ideas surfaced quietly, without force. They didn't demand action, they invited awareness. She understood then that intuition cannot speak over urgency. Panic had been drowning it out. Now, with the noise lowered, that inner guidance began to re-emerge, not as commands, but as subtle nudges. She didn't rush to act on what she felt. She let the calm settle into her body. She trusted that clarity would arrive when it was ready, not when fear demanded it. For the first time in weeks, her chest didn't feel constricted. Her breath moved more freely. The problem was still there, but it no longer defined her entire inner world. And in that newly opened space, she sensed something shifting. Not yet visible. Not yet tangible. But undeniably present, as if life had finally found room to respond. It didn't arrive as a solution. It arrived as a pause in the tension. A small, unexpected moment where things didn't feel as tight as before. She noticed it almost by accident, a brief sense of ease in the middle of an ordinary day. She realized that for the first time in weeks, she wasn't rehearsing worst-case scenarios in her mind. The familiar loop of fear had quieted, just enough for something else to surface. Not certainty. Not relief. Just a subtle sense that she wasn't alone in this. Then came the sign. Not dramatic. Not magical. Just timely. A message. A conversation. An idea that landed with unusual clarity. It didn't solve everything, but it shifted her focus. And that shift felt significant. She noticed how her body reacted before her mind did. Her breath deepened. Her shoulders relaxed. Something inside her recognized this moment as different. As if life had responded the moment she stopped demanding answers. She didn't rush to label it a miracle. She simply observed it. She stayed present with it, resisting the urge to either dismiss it or cling to it. That restraint mattered more than she realized. She understood then that signs don't appear to convince you, they appear to invite you into trust. They don't remove uncertainty, they soften it. And softness, she was learning, allows movement. This first sign didn't erase her fear. But it interrupted it. And interruption was enough to create momentum where stagnation had lived before. She felt something shift internally, not hope in the emotional sense, but alignment. A quiet knowing that she was no longer pushing against life, but beginning to move with it. And for the first time since the numbers stopped making sense, she felt that the impossible might not be unreachable, just misunderstood. After that first sign, she noticed a quiet shift in how she related to uncertainty. She didn't suddenly feel confident or fearless, but she felt steadier. Instead of scanning constantly for danger, her attention softened. She allowed moments to pass without immediately interpreting them as threats or failures. She realized that trust wasn't a feeling she needed to force. It was a posture. A choice to remain present even when answers weren't visible yet. This choice didn't eliminate responsibility, it changed how she carried it. She stopped checking the same numbers obsessively. Not because the situation had resolved, but because repeatedly confronting fear wasn't creating clarity. Space was. And in that space, her nervous system began to calm. She noticed how much energy had been leaking through anticipation. Waiting for bad news. Preparing for disappointment. Bracing for impact. When she stopped doing that, energy returned to her in subtle ways, clearer thinking, deeper breaths, a sense of internal steadiness. Trust didn't mean pretending everything was fine. It meant accepting that panic wasn't helping. That tension wasn't creating solutions. That life responded better when she stayed coherent rather than frantic. She began treating uncertainty as a phase instead of a verdict. Something temporary, unfolding, dynamic. This reframing softened the weight she had been carrying and made the future feel less rigid. She noticed that when she trusted the process, she became more receptive. Ideas landed differently. Conversations felt more meaningful. Information reached her at the right moments, without force. This wasn't blind faith. It was experiential trust, built from noticing how life responded when she stopped resisting. The more she trusted, the more space opened. The more space opened, the more responsive life felt. And in choosing trust over panic, she didn't lose control. She gained alignment. And alignment, she was beginning to see, was the doorway to what once felt impossible. Even with trust growing, fear didn't disappear completely. It still returned in quiet moments, especially when she thought about deadlines and responsibilities. But now, instead of letting fear take over, she responded differently. She no longer treated it as an emergency. She treated it as information. She felt the need to ground herself in something tangible, not to escape reality, but to stay connected to herself while facing it. That's when she returned to a simple practice that had always felt safe to her: writing. Not planning. Not calculating. Just writing. She opened her journal manifestation without expectations. No scripting the future. No pretending certainty. She wrote honestly about where she was, what she feared, and what she didn't know how to solve. That honesty softened the tension immediately. Writing slowed her thoughts down. It created space between fear and reaction. Instead of carrying everything internally, she placed it on the page. The act itself felt grounding, as if she was finally standing still long enough to breathe. She noticed how her body responded as she wrote. Her breath deepened. Her shoulders relaxed. The urgency faded just enough to think clearly. This wasn't about positive thinking, it was about coherence. She didn't ask the journal to give her money or miracles. She used it to realign her inner state. To meet herself before trying to meet the future. And that made all the difference. Over time, this practice became her anchor. Whenever fear resurfaced, she returned to the page. Not to fix the problem, but to steady herself before engaging with it. She began to understand that manifestation doesn't start with asking for outcomes. It starts with stabilizing the state from which you ask. And this simple practice was helping her do exactly that. As she kept returning to the journal, she noticed a gradual but undeniable shift happening inside her. Nothing external had changed yet, but her inner state was no longer dominated by fear. The constant tension that once colored every thought had softened into awareness. She realized that she was no longer reacting automatically to uncertainty. When worry appeared, she met it with presence instead of panic. That alone changed the rhythm of her days. The problem still existed, but it no longer consumed her identity. She noticed how her thoughts became clearer when fear wasn't leading them. Ideas connected more naturally. Possibilities surfaced without force. Her mind felt less crowded, as if space had been restored where pressure once lived. This internal shift affected her body as well. Her breathing became deeper. Sleep felt more restorative. She no longer carried the same tightness in her chest when thinking about the future. Calm didn't feel forced, it felt earned through awareness. She understood then that alignment isn't something you think your way into. It's something you allow by stabilizing your inner world. Once her state shifted, perception shifted with it. She began to trust herself again. Not because she had answers, but because she felt capable of meeting whatever came next without collapsing. That trust was quiet, but steady. She noticed how life felt less hostile when she stopped meeting it with resistance. Situations didn't immediately resolve, but they felt less heavy. Less threatening. More workable. This shift wasn't dramatic enough to announce, but it was real enough to change everything that followed. And for the first time, she sensed that the impossible might be closer than it appeared, simply waiting for alignment to complete. At some point, she noticed that her questions had changed. She no longer asked how the money would appear or from where the solution would come. Those questions had only tightened her chest before. Instead, she focused on staying aligned with the calm she had cultivated. She realized how much energy she had once spent trying to mentally control outcomes. Running scenarios. Calculating timelines. Anticipating disappointment. Letting go of those questions didn't feel reckless, it felt intelligent. It preserved her clarity. Without the constant need to know how, her attention returned to the present. She handled what was in front of her with care instead of fear. Each action felt lighter because it wasn't burdened with expectation. She noticed that when she stopped interrogating the future, information reached her more naturally. Ideas surfaced without effort. Conversations unfolded with relevance. Opportunities didn't feel forced, they felt timed. This didn't mean she stopped being responsible. It meant she stopped being tense. Responsibility carried with calm felt completely different from responsibility carried with fear. She understood that the question how often comes from doubt, not wisdom. Alignment, on the other hand, invites response without demanding explanation. And life, she was learning, responds best when it's not being interrogated. This shift gave her a sense of relief she hadn't expected. Not relief because the problem was gone, but relief because she no longer fought every moment of not knowing. She felt present. Grounded. Available. And that availability created a quiet opening where things could finally move. She didn't know what would happen next. But for the first time, she trusted that the answer wouldn't come from effort alone, it would come from alignment. It didn't arrive as a sudden windfall or an obvious miracle. It came quietly, in a way she might have missed before. A conversation that happened at the right moment. A message she almost didn't open. An idea that landed with unexpected clarity. What surprised her most was how natural it felt. There was no rush, no panic, no sense of scrambling to grab onto it. The opportunity didn't feel like something she had to chase, it felt like something meeting her where she was. She noticed how different this felt from past moments of urgency. Before, any chance had felt fragile, as if one wrong move could ruin it. Now, there was steadiness. A calm confidence that she could respond thoughtfully instead of reactively. She trusted herself enough to pause before answering. To listen fully. To feel into the situation instead of immediately calculating outcomes. That pause changed everything. It allowed her to respond from alignment rather than fear. The opportunity itself wasn't dramatic. It didn't promise instant resolution. But it opened a door she hadn't seen before. A door that led to movement instead of stagnation. To possibility instead of dread. She realized that if this had appeared weeks earlier, she might have sabotaged it through tension or doubt. Alignment had made her receptive. Calm had made her capable. This wasn't about luck. It was about timing. Not external timing, but internal readiness. Life had responded the moment she was able to receive without resistance. She felt gratitude, not excitement. Grounded appreciation rather than emotional highs. And that steadiness told her she was moving in the right direction. She didn't know yet where this path would lead. But she knew one thing clearly, something had shifted, and the impossible no longer felt out of reach. With the opportunity now present, she noticed how differently she moved into action. There was no rush to prove herself, no urgency to secure the outcome. She took steps deliberately, grounded in the calm she had cultivated. Action felt cooperative rather than forced. She realized how often, in the past, she had acted from fear disguised as motivation. That kind of action had drained her. This time, movement felt clean. Each decision connected logically and emotionally to the next, without internal conflict. She paid attention to timing. To when to respond and when to wait. Awareness guided her more than strategy. Instead of trying to control every variable, she stayed present with what was unfolding and responded thoughtfully. She noticed how her body confirmed this alignment. No tightness in her chest. No racing thoughts. Just focus. This physical coherence reassured her that she wasn't pushing against herself or against life. Even when uncertainty resurfaced, it didn't derail her. She returned to her journal, grounded her state, and continued. Action didn't mean abandoning alignment, it meant expressing it. She understood that manifestation doesn't replace effort, it refines it. When action emerges from alignment, it multiplies impact instead of resistance. Less effort produced more movement. This combination, clarity inside and action outside, created momentum she hadn't experienced before. Not dramatic acceleration, but steady progress that felt sustainable. For the first time, she felt like her actions were being met halfway by life. Not because she demanded it, but because she was finally moving in coherence. What happened next didn't arrive with noise or urgency, but with precision. Small confirmations appeared at the exact moments they were needed. Conversations aligned. Information surfaced. Doors that had felt permanently closed began to open, not all at once, but in a sequence that made sense only in hindsight. She noticed how different this felt from everything she had experienced before. There was no panic pushing her forward, no desperation chasing outcomes. Instead, there was a calm attentiveness, as if she were participating in something already in motion rather than trying to create it from scratch. There came a moment when she paused and realized that what she had once labeled impossible was no longer theoretical. It was unfolding. Not dramatically. Not perfectly. But tangibly. Step by step, reality was rearranging itself in response to the state she had been holding. What surprised her most was her own response. She didn't overanalyze. She didn't question whether it would last. She stayed present, allowing events to take shape without gripping them too tightly. That restraint kept her aligned. She felt gratitude rise quietly, without shock or disbelief. The solution didn't arrive in the form she had imagined, but it arrived in a way she could receive without fear. And that difference mattered more than she understood before. She saw clearly now that the universe doesn't respond to pleading or urgency. It responds to coherence, when thoughts, emotions, and actions point in the same direction. That coherence had finally been established. Fear lost its authority in that moment. Not because uncertainty disappeared, but because trust had replaced tension. She felt supported without needing guarantees. Grounded without needing proof. Looking back, she felt compassion for the version of herself who couldn't see a way forward. That version hadn't failed, she had simply not yet reached alignment. Now she understood, the impossible hadn't been denied. It had been waiting for the moment she was ready to receive it. What surprised her most wasn't the solution itself, it was the relief that followed. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that settles deep in the body when survival mode finally turns off. She could feel it in her breath, in the way her shoulders softened, in the quiet of her thoughts. She realized how long she had been bracing herself, even on good days. Waiting for the next problem. Preparing for the next shortfall. That constant vigilance had been exhausting her more than she ever admitted. Now, that tension loosened, and in its place came stillness. Relief didn't make her reckless or complacent. It made her present. She could finally engage with life without scanning for danger. Moments felt fuller. Choices felt clearer. She wasn't rushing anymore, she was responding. She noticed how her relationship with money shifted as well. It was no longer an enemy or a source of constant anxiety. It became a flow to manage with awareness instead of fear. That change alone felt like freedom. She understood then that manifestation isn't only about receiving what you ask for. It's about releasing the internal pressure that makes everything feel heavier than it needs to be. The real gift was not just provision, it was peace. This relief didn't erase her memory of struggle. It reframed it. Everything she had lived through now felt purposeful instead of punishing. Each moment of uncertainty had guided her toward understanding. She felt grounded in a way she hadn't before. Not because she knew what would happen next, but because she trusted herself to meet it without collapsing. That trust was steady and real. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't counting days until something changed. She was living inside the moment that had finally arrived. With everything settling into place, she began to reflect on what this experience had truly taught her. Not about money alone, but about trust and timing. She saw clearly now that panic had never accelerated solutions, it had only clouded perception. Calm had done what fear never could. She understood that timing is not something to fight or manipulate. It responds to readiness, not desperation. When she had been frantic, nothing moved. When she became aligned, movement began, quietly, precisely, without force. She realized how often she had assumed delays meant denial. That silence meant failure. This experience rewrote that belief completely. Delay had been preparation. Silence had been integration. Nothing had been wasted. Trust, she learned, is not blind optimism. It's the ability to remain present without demanding immediate proof. It's staying coherent when outcomes aren't visible yet. And that kind of trust changes how life responds. She noticed how her intuition had been guiding her the entire time, even when she didn't recognize it. Every moment of discomfort had been pointing her toward alignment, not punishment. She had simply learned how to listen. This awareness softened her relationship with the future. She no longer feared what she couldn't see. Uncertainty became space instead of threat. A place where possibilities could form. She felt grateful for the struggle, not because it was easy, but because it had revealed how everything really works. The impossible hadn't arrived randomly. It had arrived on time. She knew this understanding would stay with her far beyond this moment. It wasn't situational. It was foundational. And it changed how she would meet life from now on. If you're standing in that place right now, staring at numbers that don't add up, carrying quiet fear, wondering how next month will work, her story is not meant to impress you. It's meant to remind you that your current uncertainty is not a verdict. It's a signal. She learned that the moment things feel impossible is often the moment something deeper is being asked of you. Not more effort. Not more panic. But a different way of relating to what's happening. Alignment before answers. Calm before clarity. Life doesn't respond to fear the way we expect it to. It responds to coherence. To the state you carry into each moment. When panic loosens its grip, space opens. And in that space, solutions that once felt unreachable can finally arrive. This doesn't mean ignoring reality or avoiding responsibility. It means meeting reality without collapsing inside it. Handling what's in front of you while trusting that timing is not working against you, it's working with your readiness. The impossible didn't show up because she begged for it. It showed up because she became able to receive it. Because she stopped fighting uncertainty long enough for life to respond. Nothing you're experiencing right now is random. Every pause, every delay, every moment of not knowing is shaping your alignment, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. Sometimes, the moment you don't know how you'll get through next month is the moment life prepares to show you what you couldn't see before. And when it does, you'll understand, this was never about money alone. It was about learning how everything really works.